The local church is like baking a cake. It's made up of multiple ingredients, right? If we're just building weekend services, or if we are just building a connect group model in homes and that's all our priority, or if we're just social justice project warriors, like they're all good things to do. But if you're just cooking with eggs, you're not cooking a cake. You're cooking an omelette. And I think the local church is a cake. I think it's all of these ingredients in harmony and in balance. My dad is a nurse, registered nurse. To keep his RN, he needs a certain amount of hours doing a certain amount of study and a certain amount of practice. You can do a bachelor's of theology, you could do a master's, a doctorate, you could do a Cert 4, and it could be 20 years ago. If we are not continually professionally developing ourselves, well, I actually think we have an obligation as pastors to keep doing that. We have a responsibility to stay up to date on that stuff.
We've got Pastor Andrew Midson in the studio today. I tell you what, mate, we've known each other for almost 20 years now. And what I want to do today is give our listeners a snapshot into our many calls, coffees, dinners we've had. Even recently we connected when we were both in Sydney on the one day. Give our listeners an insight into some of the things we talk about, our passion for local church, leadership, discipleship, church done right. And we'll have a few laughs along the way. So this is like inside the ropes. This is kind of like the pit lane chat to Andrew Staggs and Andrew Midson. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
No, it's good to be here. Love the F1 reference. Love a bit of the old golfer reference as we heard. But
I still remember one thing you taught me this. Come on. Give me some hungry chicken.
Yes,
That was from Scrubs or something, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Iconic sitcom in the 90s. Yeah.
And this is where I learnt the power of intergenerational leadership, where you were just teaching me how to be cool and be relevant when I thought I was pretty cool at the time.
I don't think that's cool anymore, but we can still do it. But
our family does another version of it. So thank you for your contribution to our family life.
Yeah.
Well, we've given our lives to serve God in the local church, and what a great ride. So we've got some questions we'll talk through, but can you start, for those who don't know Andrew Midson, can you give us a bit of a summary of your life, some of the various roles, your length of ministry, and sort of what you're doing now, please?
I've been married for almost 18 years to Crystal. We have two kids, Ezekiel, who's 16, and Sabella, who's 13. I've been on church staff for almost 13 years now, but been involved in church for almost a lot longer than that. Kind of made a decision to step out of a church we were in when we got married to be part of, I guess, what you call the church plant at the time. We joined pretty early on. That was Westlife Church, which is where we met.
You'd only been married a month or two, hadn't you?
Yeah, a couple of weeks. Yeah, when we stumbled across it, which was awesome. And then the past 8 years been at Hillsong Church, was a campus pastor and just had a role change this year to be part of our national team.
So you've seen a lot of versions of church for young men. I mean, Hillsong Greater Springfield, that sounds captivating. Awesome. Can you tell us what have you seen God do and what you've been part of for that length of time?
Yeah, so I don't think you can talk about Hillsong Greater Springfield without talking about Westlife. So Westlife Church was the church that we became a part of planting, that you were leading for the first season, and that was a healthy church in a growing community. After it hit a decision point, and the board had one or two directions that they would go, and they chose to become a part of a Hillsong church. And I remember the first weekend that we were at Hillsong, and we became Hillsong, and the church, which was about 200 to 250 people at the time, suddenly grew in the first weekend to 500, and then Crystal and I, or myself, was really on staff then to help take it forward. And I think through our illustrious leadership in the first 6 months, we grew up from that to about 100 odd people. And then just the next 7 years, we just saw God do something in that space. And probably in many ways live up to the potential that was in the church, part of being in a growing region. And then we've just had to navigate, even 4 or 5 years into that, navigate COVID like everybody else, navigate all sorts of other seasons within Hillsong that we've had the past 3 years. It hasn't been the smoothest ride. And just watching what God does through a group of people who are resilient and called is remarkable.
Now we both have a passion or a real clear understanding of master planned estates or developments globally. So what's it like to lead and to build a church, various version of church, in a master planned estate in New Ipswich or East Ipswich, as some people would say?
So if you look at Hillsong context for 2 seconds, our main campus, which is in Baulkham Hills in the Norwest region, was a master planned city. So Maha Sinnathamby, who is the architect behind the Greater Springfield area, he years ago went down to have a look at what was happening there and was like, I want to replicate this up in Queensland. So master planned city simply means that there is a master plan for the city. So you'll see, if you come out to Springfield, there's a lot of empty blocks, vacant areas that have all been pre-planned with how the scope of the whole framework is going to look. So that's fantastic. And you see the health of that within the Norwest region if you're there. And that's where, probably to Pastors Brian and Bobby's credit, they were able to plant a church there. Then the growth of a community happened around it.
Because they moved with the times. They moved with where the people were flowing, because there's usually 2 times that people would come to church, where they're either in tension or when they're in transition.
Yes, yeah.
So establishing a church in a growing area, that's got to be a smart thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a spiritual connotation to, we have our plans, but the master has his plan, obviously,
boom.
which works as well. Springfield as a region's pretty unique now. It does have houses obviously being built pretty steady rate, and the region's probably turned from being a move out to the suburbs to it's a very multicultural community now. So you do see a lot of people who are moving into Australia, maybe where their family of origin has been overseas, they're now coming into the area. So you're always going to have the growth of attrition just by being in a suburb like it, but you're also going to have all of the realities of just what that looks like when it comes to buildings and properties and land and all sorts of stuff. And we are not the only church in Greater Springfield. There's a lot of people who, because of the nature of it, felt like
there's a lot of activity there, isn't there?
There is. I felt like they were called to plant there, which is fantastic. I think if there's one thing we need, it's more churches. You just then face the realities in a master plan city of what does land, building, acquisition look like, which is a tension you've got to manage. Yeah.
I love because it's an aspirational corridor too. You got the Western Corridor. When we started in 2005, 2006, it was Australia's fastest growing region at the time. So generally, governments had built developments on the edge of the city, sort of working class housing commission types areas. One thing I found, that Springfield Greater Western Corridor is an aspirational corridor. So you've got families moving in there. The challenge is they always take themselves with them. So they take their own sets of problems and challenges. So behind those brick veneers, there's still a lot of challenges in families. That's why they need to be part of a life-giving family, a good local church.
Yeah. I think Springfield as a region is pretty unique without getting into the weeds too much. It's unique because you've got lower socioeconomic area in Ipswich, and then the surrounding suburbs in that area, if anyone's familiar with it. You've got places like Goodna and Redbank, which are lower socioeconomic, and then you've got Springfield, which is very much middle class, double income working with young families. But attached to that, you've got quite expensive suburbs like Brookwater. So I remember just a story from when I was a youth pastor. We would have a trip where we would leave Springfield, middle class kind of area. You'd drop off we dropped off a family who they were very, very wealthy, lived in Brookwater on a golf course. We'd drive into a gated community, drop them off, and then in the same car trip you'd have we had a student we're taking out to Redbank in Housing Commission, whose mum was waiting to go into prison as his father would come out of prison. So that was within kind of one 20-minute round trip. So within 5 to 10 kilometres, you're very much hitting very different socioeconomic groups, which are unique challenges. And then even within a middle-class area, the tensions on middle-class families, cost of living, all of that stuff. It's just a reality for people to navigate. So it just brought with it its own unique challenges.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of your old hood too. You sort of grew up.
I did,
in the fourth. What's the postcode?
4300.
The 4300.
4300. Yeah.
Beverly Hills 90210. Yeah. Just before we move on, Master Plan Estate, I remember somebody gave me some money. They knew I wanted to go overseas. They gave me some money because they knew I wanted to go see some stuff in America, and so they gave me. They said later on you could have spent up to $20,000. I think only $14,000 for that trip. 3 weeks overseas, but I remember sitting in a Los Angeles hotel room. Trying to process what I'd seen And there's a range of, I sort of had about 5 key insights through rumination, but then the prophetic touch of God on it. But I just remember thinking over the last 30, 40 years where God had moved in that sort of mega church model was in large master plan estates. I'd just been a Saddleback, the whole phenomenon around Orange County, Irvine, that Saddleback area. Then I'd been to Willow Creek, Northwest Chicago, out South Barrington, out that way. And I remember God said, where is it in Australia? And I remember thinking Northwest, that Hillsong phenomena, North Melbourne. There was a proliferation of churches coming up there in master plan estates. And it was like, so where's that in Brisbane? And I just remember like my eyes just having this epiphany. It's the Western Corridor. Got on the internet and said it's Australia's fastest growing region. So off the plane, literally 3-4 hours later, I'm staying with my family out there at Orion near that bridge there. And we grabbed a rock at that moment. So we just prayed. Said we dedicate our lives to building whatever God wants to build. And I just remember there's other churches there, but I remember God said it takes different kinds of churches to reach different kinds of people. Yeah. And I realised there wasn't anyone reaching like who I was, upper middle class, educated, professional background, and so that set off the chain reaction. So what a wonderful journey.
That's right. Yeah. No, I love that.
Wonderful journey, hey?
Yeah.
You've had a revelation, you and I, and you've spoken in our college as a guest lecturer and really lit the classroom up. You've really had a revelation about the church or the ecclesia, God's body, God's family. Can you want to talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting dynamics, I don't want to labour the point of having a podcast all about the pandemic, but I do think the pandemic was the great value reset, and it probably in some ways it halted momentum of churches, which meant we kind of had to consider like, what do we do? Why do we do what we do, and what do we do within the framework of what we have? I remember when we came back into services, this would be in Queensland late 2020. I know that other states had different timelines. There was this prevailing narrative from some people: should we go back to church? Should we not go back to church? Is church an essential service? Is it not? What's the function of the church? There were people who'd been away from church long enough to develop other habits and enjoy their weekends, and I've just always had a core belief. I read Courageous Leadership from Bill Hybels, and he popularised the phrase, the local church is the hope of the world. And there's something in my spirit that's just been gripped on to that. And I think one of the things we learned in 2020 is the local church is much broader than our maybe interpretation had been. But the gathering of the saints on a Sunday doesn't or shouldn't necessarily change or it should become even more important. There's a couple of core beliefs I've got. I believe formation and discipleship is best worked out in community. Yeah. And community has got 2 applications. It's got the gathered body on a Sunday where God just turns up in a service and does something, but it also has an outworking during the week. I read a book from, I think his name's Ed Silvio or Ed DeSilvio, I can't remember, and it's all around the ecclesia, based on Matthew 16 where Jesus speaks, and there's this well-known passage. Jesus is up there on a rock over Caesarea of Philippi, and he turns to Peter and he says, who do you guys say I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ. And then Jesus uses the word for the first time in the Gospels. He said, on that confession I will build my ecclesia, or ecclesia, my church. And I like to visualize it like this cinematic movie moment where Jesus is up there, the score's rising, there's a nice sunset or whatever behind him. But the word ecclesia wasn't necessarily a foreign word. It was frequently used within Old Testament times just to describe like the temple and the synagogue gatherings, or an assembly of people. And in the Roman times, it was very much used within Roman culture as this idea of like a mobile people group. If you think like almost like a protest in the park, like it's that kind of mobile people group. And what Jesus did is he kind of brought these 2 ideals of the synagogue and the temple, the indwelling presence of God in the temple and the teaching of the scriptures in the synagogue, and this mobile people movement, and pulls them both together into this one idea. And that passage is so symbolic because like we tend to just think on this rock he's talking only about Peter, whose name will be changed obviously from Simon to Peter. But there's actually this deeper connotation. He's actually standing at this rock looking over an oppressed Israel, or it impressed Jewish people with the Roman government, Caesar of Philippi being kind of the main governmental stronghold, everything that's representative of the strongholds in the world. They're literally standing on a rock. And if you remember, Jesus' phrase is like, and the gates of hell will not prevail, or the gates of Hades. The place where they're literally standing is called the gates of Hades. And in it was a place of temple worship where they would worship the god Pan at the time, with all sorts of children sacrifice that's happening at the bottom. And Jesus stands with his misfit bunch of disciples, and he says, regardless of what's happening in the world, Caesar of Philippi, the government, or what demonic powers come against us, the gates of hell, I will build my ecclesia, or my ecclesia. And it's just this like powerful moment. And I think for us, if there's one lesson that we've learned in COVID, it's not that the local church is less important, but maybe the local church is broader, and it needs to encapsulate both the time in the temple where we gather together and the time around tables. And we need strong foundations of formation and strong discipleship pathways and people who are living their lives in pursuit of Jesus, but the mystic, powerful gathering of the saints on a Sunday proclaiming the name of Jesus is vital to the health, I think, of a believer. Yeah.
That was powerful.
Yeah, you'll get us going. And
Well, so how does that, like we would use the expression, the local church then.
Yeah.
So what is the... Talk to us about the value of the local church, or an expression of that grand vision as outlined by Jesus and as powerfully presented just then by yourself.
Yeah, I think a local church can't be. I like just, this is just a personal anecdote, so it may not make sense in it. Two things. Firstly, Jesus gives one command at the end, known as the Great Commission, or if you grew up in Pentecostal church, the Great Omission. You don't need permission to do the commission. Anyway.
I thought the Great Commission was 20%.
Yeah, look. But he literally says, go make disciples. I think what we've got to be careful not to compartmentalize is in 2020 we recognized that we were light on, some people would say we were light on discipleship. Yeah. So now most people would say, oh, of course, it's midweek stuff is the discipleship. Just in my perspective, I think our job, Mark Sayers wrote a book where he calls a non-anxious presence, and he talks about greenhouses and ecosystems in it. And I think it's just a great framing point. Everything we do should be creating a greenhouse being a place where people grow, where we are growing disciples. Our Sunday gatherings are as much about generating disciples as our midweek connections and our pathways and our Holy Spirit moments. We've just got to fight to create a greenhouse where discipleship is happening. And if we don't see our Sunday services as a part of that, then we actually separate the necessity. Just in my limited experience, it's where a lot of people now are speaking about home groups. Like, we've got to get in homes, we've got to do that. I absolutely agree. It's also it is a part of the ecosystem that we're building. Like, another simplistic example I'd use for that is, I think healthy local church is like baking a cake. Like, I'm not a particularly good baker or a particularly good cook, but I know that like a cake is made up of eggs, flour, sugar, milk. Am I missing anything? Butter. I don't know if I said butter. It's made up of multiple ingredients, right? You don't eat a piece of cake and you don't sit there and say, geez, I can tell you've used legitimate butter in this cake. You just say, gee, this cake is nice. And again, like with eggs, you don't necessarily taste an egg in the cake. You just say, like, gee, this cake is nice. Yeah. If we're just building weekend services, or if we are just building like a connect group model in homes and that's all our priority, or if we're just social justice project warriors, like, they're all good things to do. But if you're just cooking with eggs, you're not cooking a cake. You're cooking an omelette. Like, it's actually okay. But as long as we acknowledge we're not cooking a cake, and I think the local church is a cake. I think it's all of these ingredients in harmony and in balance. And this is like Paul talks about this in Corinthians 12 when he says the body comes together, and like different parts of the body don't say I'm more important than something else. You don't look at a cake and go, oh, this ingredient is more important than that ingredient. You actually look at the makeup of the cake and say our job is to create a holistic cake that our communities can thrive on. Yeah. It's not just one ingredient. And sometimes, like, again, I'm not a chef and I'm stretching the analogy probably to the nth degree. Sometimes you taste a cake and you go, this is light on sugar. We need to add some more sugar to it. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you throw out the other ingredients. Yeah. And I think that's my heart. It's when we recognize that we're missing an ingredient, we don't throw out the other ingredients. We don't say, oh my gosh, it's missing sugar, let's get rid of the eggs. Like, no, what we actually do is we bring the balance of the whole up. And then this is where it's like, you can have chocolate cakes, you can have caramel cakes, you can have cheesecakes. I don't know how cheesecake's made. This is where it becomes less about methodology.
Yeah.
It more becomes about what is the type of cake that we're to build for this community, which is why, and it's been a prevailing narrative that, and I mentioned it before within Springfield, there's lots of other churches that they are not our competition. There's lots of other different types of cakes. Some people would come to a Hillsong Church and they'll be like, I don't dig caramel cake. It's like, that's totally fine. Yeah. Go eat a cake though, because cake is good. Like, this is not just in context of the church. In general, cakes are good. But like, that's fine. Go and find a cake you like and
Powerful, mate.
And feast on it and eat it to your heart's content. But we've just got to be careful. And obviously, like, if we were to go into all the different ingredients, we don't. Like, I think that's too micro for this. I think we just want to be super sensitive that we are not sitting and saying, because we feel like we needed to correct course as the broader church within the past 3 or so years. It's careful that we don't sit there and say, well, now it's just this one thing.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing that I've learned, I've lived on trying to build church on silver bullets.
Yeah.
It's fine to make an omelette, but you're not making a cake.
It just shows that we do need to keep thinking deeply about these things. I heard Frank DiMarzio at the beginning of this year just say he's just really worried about next generation of young pastors he's coaching in American context. He says they just haven't worked out their ecclesiology, their theology of the church. I know that we teach in one of our units, there's like 105 or 106 different metaphors for the church, different expressions, and we need to think deeply and have clear convictions on what we're building. I know as I've coached pastors for years now, this one conviction will determine how you build the church. Like, is Sunday the main game of the week, or is Sunday about setting up the next 6 days?
Yeah.
And is Sunday a celebration of what God's done in all of us in our various expressions the last 6 days?
Yeah.
Or have we identified church and it's the central focus of everything that we do?
Yeah, my simple perspective, and this is also based on the work Pastor Phil is doing with us across
Dilly?
Hillsong. Would
champion.
Would simply be most of those things are both ends.
Yeah.
I don't think is it the central gathering? Well, it's not is it or isn't it? It's the gathering at the end of a week, and it's to set up for our week. And I think there's a lot of ands in there.
Yeah, great.
We would have the phrase now, we are a mission-focused church. So everything, not an event-based church. And one of the books I think that's healthy that I'd recommend, there's two books written by a guy called Todd Bolsinger. One of them's Canoeing the Mountains, and it talks about a journey of explorers who were traveling through America, and they thought they would just be able to follow a water source through America, and they hit the Rocky Mountains, and they realized that you cannot canoe over a mountain. And he hypothesizes this idea. This will make sense in 2 seconds. He talks about this idea of adaptive versus technical leadership. He talks about technical leadership being the best practice principles that we've always done. This is how we've always done things around here. This is the best practice, the technical ability of what we know to do. And then there's adaptive leadership. What do you do when you have a canoe and you hit a mountain? Well, you cannot just say, well, we've always done it this way with a canoe. You need to adapt in it. So part of our journey is a mission versus event-based church. And Todd Bolsinger talks a lot about the missional component of the church within that book. And for us, like, a Sunday gathering serves the mission of the church, as does a connect group. It serves the mission of the church. When you look at all of our leadership pipelines and pathways, they serve the mission of the church. It's not that the Sunday gathering doesn't matter. It's that the Sunday gathering is not the master. Everything serves mission. Okay. And I think that's the difference, because then you've got connect groups serve mission, age groups serve mission, structures and strategic plans serve mission, finances serve mission, the weekend services serve the mission of the church. And I would say it's a flourishing, vibrant church where the presence of God turns up and brings breakthrough, where the saints glorify God, where we create a welcome home mat for people to come and experience God's presence and find community on a Sunday, etc., etc. All of that still serves the mission. So we don't turn away from having great weekend services. But it's not the main game. We're not making every decision based on a Sunday gathering. Everything we do serves the broader mission that we're called to do.
Mate, I'm loving your clarity and even the way that you're moving with new revelation. Like, Hillsong has set the pace for many decades around different things. I remember late 90s, like Donna Crouch was one of the sort of service pastors at the Hills campus, and just outworking the vision of like what the local church is. I think history will treat Hillsong quite kindly as a version of a modern day renewal movement, because it really has lifted the water level of the local church. But I remember even and Pastor Bobby Houston writing that great book, Heaven is in the House. Yeah. And there was just a season of fresh revelation about the awe and the wonder and the beauty of one of the metaphors, the bride of Christ, the family, one house, kind of many rooms. Yeah. I remember even walking in to a Hillsong service one day, and they had they used to do these great introductions, and I remember just flashed up, it was Genesis 28, Stairway to Heaven. Jacob has this moment, and he says in Genesis 28:17, this is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. That flashed up. And I remember Donna Crouch told me recently that she had this, when they got the Message version, and they wrote up Ephesians 1, verse 23. It says, Jesus is in charge of it all. He has the final word on everything. At the center of all this, Christ rules the church. Wait for it. Insert dramatic music. The church, you see, is not peripheral to the world. The world is peripheral to the church. The church is Christ's body, in which he speaks and acts, by which he fills everything with his presence. How's that?
I love that.
It's a wonderful sense that God has called us into his family. I remember me, when at a stage of my life I was lost and broken, and came into a life. I'm getting all emotional now. Just come into a life-giving place. God sets the lonely, the solitary in families, and that's why we need healthy local churches, eh?
Yep, that's right,
This is why we've given our life to build the most beautiful bride. Tell me about the uniqueness and power of the Christian faith. Why do you preach Christ? Why do you preach about the power of the gospel, mate?
I think again, there's lots and lots of study that we now reflect upon on looking on healthy values and stuff. I just genuinely believe, without being without being too abstract or philosophical, I don't know how we make sense of the life that we're in without a creator and a relationship with God. There's a beautiful mystery, I think, to our faith, and anyone who wants to be argued in, like I've just probably not intelligent enough to argue someone in, but I feel like I've very much given up on that idea anyway. There's a beautiful mystery to a relationship with God. I think on an abstract level, we don't pass our own moral code. There's got to be a sense somewhere out there that there is a God who governs things and who makes sense of some of the madness. I also think, we're seeing, Andrew Sullivan calls them pseudo-religions, but we're actually seeing the rise on pseudo-religions where things like politics, conspiracy theories, ironically enough, are becoming these new community groups, very tribalistic, that people gather towards. I think all they're doing is they're seeking to replicate that which you find within a healthy local church. And I think we talk a bit about church, but I think that's where God places, when it says he places the broken in families, he places them into community. Like, that's the word that's frequently used through the Bible when Jesus is describing his disciples. He's actually talking about family in there. So I do think there's a sense within church of the community that we're called to be in. We're the called out people. And the more you hang out with anybody who's involved in local church, they'll speak of the power of God, at work in their lives, in their day-to-day lives, the power of his indwelling presence and his spirit guiding and leading them. I think all of that is part of this Christian life that we are in. And as pastors, obviously what we do is our outworking of that is in the context of a church. But I think this idea of a personal and vibrant relationship with God that helps, fueled by his spirit, I think the hope would be from God, or biblically, that it interweaves itself into every element of our lives, and it helps us as parents, it helps us as in our vocations, whether it be in church staff or for those who don't attend in church staff. It weaves itself into our relationships, but it flourishes within the community that we're all called to be a part of as we are being formed. I know there's a bit of a rise of the old Dallas Willard spiritual formation.
He's back.
He's back in the form of there's a bunch of guys who are now on that formation. But the reality is we are all being formed into something. Like, formation is spiritual formation. It's not all of humanity is being formed.
Social media is forming a lot of people at the moment.
Well, Paul talks in I think it's Philippians 3. He says, imitate Christ as I imitate him. The reality, and reality is we are all imitating something.
Yeah.
I think our challenge is what are we being formed into?
Yeah.
And just from my experience as a pastor and as a human being, like even if you take the pastor side out of it, actually, just in my experience as a human being, we are all chasing the formation of something. And the gospel ultimately is about the fact that we serve a king from a different kingdom, and it means that we serve at the pleasure. I think it's a West Wing phrase, I serve at the pleasure of the president. We serve at the pleasure of a king, and he has a way of living, and he has a kingdom ethic that is wildly different to the world's kingdom ethic. And he invites us on that journey to be formed more into that heaven's not a one-day reality. Heaven on earth, as we walk out the sanctification journey with Jesus, is about the formation of who we're becoming.
This is our future hope.
But it's a present reality as much as it's a reality one day. And I think to boil down our faith journey or the gospel to will I go to heaven or will I not, actually reduces the very idea that God is a God who is, Christmas time, we use the phrase Emmanuel. I don't think when it was stated it was just meant to be at Christmas, but Emmanuel, God with us, walks with us, indwelling presence of God through his Spirit now, like that shapes and forms us on this earth, that the life we live today is as important as the life we go to one day. I think that's the essence of what God calls us to be part of in this life. And if we have an eternity only focused Christianity, then what we find is that it actually doesn't give us the fuel for today. But yeah,
that's inspiring. Hey, my wife and I were at a local cafe, and the Blues Brothers car drove past.
Oh yeah,
and I just remember I found myself saying, "We're on a mission. We're on a mission for God."
Yeah.
So you and I have responded to that call, a mission. Like, why have you given your life to work for God or to respond to this mysterious thing called the call of God?
Yeah, I think just pause for 2 seconds. Do I need to silence my phone real quick? I thought it was on silent. Sorry.
Or is that what made that noise?
Yeah.
Maybe just, sorry. No, that's really fine.
See, did you see your eyes go?
Yeah, I did see that. It's like, oh no, and then I lost my whole train of thought.
Hey, we doing good?
Yeah, this is great.
I'm loving this. This is we've got a great.
Right.
I'll pitch the question again.
Yeah. I got a good answer to it.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I've got an answer. I don't know if it's a good one. Is this is audio right? Yeah.
Because I go and say this is inspiring. Yeah, inspiring. And then I go.
Blues Brothers run a mission.
My wife and I were recently in a cafe, and the Blues Brothers car, the old black and white police car, drove past, and I just found myself spontaneously saying, "We're on a mission. We're on a mission for God."
Yeah.
So you and I have both responded to this mission, this call.
Yeah.
Why have you given your life
Yeah.
to work for God?
Yeah. Philosophically, for 2 seconds, I think one of the big revelations that I've had is I think we've singularized the call of God. We've said, well, we're doing the call of God because we're in ministry. Or if you answer the call of God, then you've got to be a pastor one day. Or I've done altar calls before. Sometimes I slip into it now where I'm like, maybe you're here and you sense God's call on your life. And, and what we generally mean by that is pastoral leadership or full-time ministry. I actually think there are multiple calls of God. I think every single person is called. Will they answer the call to belong to the family of Christ? I think that's the very first call that people respond to. Will I choose to submit my life to Christ? That's one of the calls that everyone has to. But then there's a call to mature. I think that's called, obviously, sanctification. And when we talk formation, we're really talking about the call to mature. It's like this is Corinthians 13, it says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I talked like a child, I ate like a child, but now I'm a man, I act different. This is Paul in Hebrews when he says, guys, we should not be still on milk. What are we doing here? So there's a call to mature, which is a lifelong, never-ending discipleship journey that we finish one day when we go to eternity with Christ. This act of following Jesus. So there's a call for that. Then I think there's the call to mission. And when you talk mission for a second, like I don't think that is just a church or pastoral context. There is a mission that every one of us as part of God's kingdoms declare in Christ. This is Corinthians 5, I think it's 2 Corinthians 5 verse 20, where it says, Christ therefore makes his appeal to us as ambassadors. An ambassador representing a foreign kingdom, like come near to God. I think there's a calling that every one of us are called to, our families, to our streets, to our workplaces, to the person we walk past, a local coffee shop. We are all part of this missional outworking. And then there's the last little nugget where some people will be called into the vocation of full-time ministry. And for people who choose to do that, we can do full-time. The ministry of someone who's got a business and they're just serving God through that is as important as the ministry to be a pastor. But I just knew when I was 17 years old at an altar, praying, God, what do you want me to do with my life? I just knew that this is what I'd be doing. So I'm totally surprised in the context, but I think I just would have been pushing towards this my whole life to serve God in this way, because that's what God called us to ultimately.
Yeah.
But my job is to balance those calls. I think it's more like we're juggling those things. It's not like one is more important than something else, because I'm also called to be a husband. I'm called to be a father. And we've got too many stories. I think we were waxing lyrical a little bit before about guys who've fallen in ministry. Too many guys, it's because they stopped juggling things and they just held on to one calling that was higher than any other. I think that's the thing to remind ourselves of. Like, just because we're called to full-time ministry does not mean that comes at the expense of every other calling. In fact, the call to continually belong and mature, and the call to my family and the call to my home, they are far more important than what I do with my work life.
Yeah, that's powerful. So I suppose to keep this focus, because we can drift, that's why we've all made commitments to the call to come and be with Him, to spend time with Him, and we might express that in a quiet time. So what does a quiet time look for you over a 7-day period? Now, especially because you've got a new role within Hillsong, you're doing a lot more traveling. So talk to us about that, and we can edit it up later on if we need to.
No, it's actually a really unique challenge. I think one of the challenges every pastor goes through is, and anyone, if you're in ministry of any capacity, is a lot of our content preparation is done in our private time. So I have like a little bit of a boundary I've established the last couple of years, which I'm semi-okay with. And that is when I do my personal devotional time with God, it's outside of work hours. I think that's just been an important boundary for me, because I did find if I'm reading my Bible during work hours, then I just feel like there's a crossover there. So the first thing I do in the morning now, I'm in a chat group with a bunch of guys, and it's a very simplistic thing. There's probably 20 guys across Australia, maybe 30 guys across Australia in it. And what we do is we read a book of the Bible together, and then we will literally read a chapter, and then we all text in the morning. So when I hop up in the morning, depending on time zones, there might be 20, 25 or 5, depending on the time, different messages in there from guys, or it's just a paragraph of their personal reading, what they've done. Yeah. And I'm in probably 2 or 3 different chats like that. Some of them smaller groups, some of them larger groups. And we just post. So that's just become a rhythm for me. It's the first thing I do in the morning. It's outside of my work hours, and it's just a very simplistic way for me to start with God. And I would say what I probably used to do is I used to commit to a slab of prayer, and then I'd be pretty prayerless the rest of the day. A habit I've just tried to make now is I just try to pray. Again, I'm like a simple man, so these are simple things. I just try to pray like dozens of time in a day before I go into meetings, after I go out of something. I just try to pray short, sharp prayers about stuff. I'll pray when I'm exercising. Try to give time there. Wow. And I'm really, really aware of feeding myself. I'm going to give like a really obscure habit in a minute that I brought in this year that's been a game changer for my growth. But I'm really aware of me being involved in church services that I'm not leading. This is where technology is like the biggest gift. So I know it's probably a little lame, but on my Monday on a day off, like I have like a rhythm. I'll always hop up, maybe go for a run in the morning. And in that, like when I'm doing that, I'll watch a church service. I'll listen to a church service. It's not mine, something I'm unfamiliar with. And it's just a way for me to remind myself that the world is much bigger than the world that I'm in. Wow. I can give you one last like little game changer. And this is something that actually Phil's challenged all of us on. I do not use a mobile phone in services or any team meetings I'm in anymore. So what I do is I have a notepad. In every service I'm in, I write notes on the preacher, irrelevant of who they are. In every team meeting I'm in, I just found this is me. Other people may be better disciplined than me, but I found as a pastor, I've been in enough church services where sometimes I'll end up replying to text messages. Yeah. I'll end up replying to emails. I've seen like I've just got to buy something online, so I'll jump on a little bit of Black Friday sales. So one of the big game changers the past 6 months, really challenged by Phil, And just from watching him, the fruit of his life too is now I have notepads and I write all my messages. I write out any message I'm in. I take notes in it. It has been a game changer for my growth. I feel like I get so much more out of weekend services now. It stops me from subconsciously flicking into a work mode and maybe thinking about the service. And instead, if I'm on 2 services, I write 2 sets of notes. It can be the same message, but you would be amazed at how I get different things. Yeah. And God speaks to us in a different way.
Wow. That I reckon I can hear people listening in their car right now go, that is a game-changing idea. Thank you for your honesty.
It is a discipline though, because there is always an excuse to be on your phone, especially if you are in pastoral leadership. There is always an excuse. And I found this has just been a personal challenge for me. I cannot ask people to do, when I'm up there preaching and I see someone on their phone, my first thought goes to, are they listening? What are they doing? And some people, I know people who are disciplined enough to just take notes on their phone. But I know me. Yeah. I am not disciplined enough to just take notes on my phone. You text me, I will respond. Yeah. So it's been a game changer for me. Yeah.
Come back to the quiet time. You said you're in 3 chats. Why have you got other people involved? If it's meant to be quiet time, why you got other people involved?
Yeah, I think it's accountability, number one. Yeah. I don't do it for the other people. I do it as an accountability thing. Why they're 3 different ones? I lead at lots of different levels. One of them is a group that I'm just in as peers. One of them is a group that I've got guys who do the same, who we hold each other accountable on that. For me in my quiet time, I don't text my prayers to people, but for me it's actually the discipline of there's a bunch of other guys in there who are all sharing what they're reading that day. It's just a way to keep me accountable on a daily habit. Yeah. And there's other stuff I do in that. Like I have other times with God. There's books that I read where I really feel like God speaks to me and challenges me on in my own personal space. It's very intimate between me and God. Yeah. That's not the only source that I have, but it's just been a starting point for me in a day. And if someone doesn't respond in a chat or hasn't responded for 3, 4, 5 days, you'll find someone inevitably will text outside of it and go, hey bro, noticed you haven't been. It's just a great community.
Yeah, the accountability.
Great accountability piece, yeah.
Well, you and I do lots of leadership chats and pep talk. I think I've got a list of people say, oh, what are the keys to leadership? So like any good spirit-filled pastor, they're all alliterated, so we'll start with the letter C. So I think I'm up to 27 or 28 different things that start with C. So I've bundled them all up into core. These are some things that go in my core. Yeah. Then I've got another thing. Another essential is community with accountability.
Yes.
We did some research as a college back 5 years ago about, I think it was 8 essential things that new leaders need. Yeah. And one of them, the feedback from our sample pool was, you need an accountability relationship. You need someone who can say no to you.
Yeah.
It's an essential. So the fact that you've got 3 versions of that, this is awesome. Triangulated yourself.
There'd be a lot of other areas where I would say I need accountability as a leader outside of just that. Accountability, I think the cornerstone of accountability is humility and teachability though.
Yeah, okay.
Because if you're not humble and you're not teachable, then you just lie. Like an accountability works when you are prepared to come and say, I want to bring. So I've had lots of times when I've texted my people leader before and I've said, I want you to know I was late into this meeting today, or I was late to a team meeting. And they'll say, no, that's fine. I'll say, no, I want you to know because I know I'm slipping. Or I want you to know that I reacted poorly in a meeting today. I've had that recently where I'll just say, hey, I just want you to know I could have led this. These are my reflections on it. Because ultimately everyone wants accountability. Accountability is a great word, but I think of like Micah 6, I think it's Micah 6 where he says, what do I want? That you act justly, love mercy and walk humbly. Yeah. The problem is that we love justice for others, but we want mercy for ourselves. Or we want accountability for others, but we don't like accountability our own way. And if we're not teachable, we will never pursue accountability. So for me, I try to make that a habit. I try to be accountable proactively, not retrospectively. So honestly, like there's within the role that I serve in now, there are other guys who have got so much experience. I tend to be like a pretty quick shoot from the hip, very direct, make an assessment early, a judgment call. Yeah. There are guys on the team who are just they're unbelievable developers and believers of people. So for me, proactive accountability sometimes is, I've got this situation, this is what I'm thinking of doing, can you lead me in that, please?
Wow.
So, and I've gotten some of the best feedback because I've done that. And then I go to them afterwards. There's a guy who, I look after a group of campuses now, so I look after a lot of campus pastors across 3 different states.
Yeah.
And one of them, who's a great preacher, who's preached in some contexts that I haven't, I went to him the other, about 2 months ago, and I said, hey, I'm about to preach here. You've done it. I would love your feedback. And he said, can I give you proper feedback? Because technically he
like proper feedback.
He goes, can I actually give you feedback? Because he technically reports to me. So I'm technically, he would say I'm his boss, whatever you want to call it. And I said, yeah, like I really want it. And he gave me just a piece of feedback that I was like that is brilliant feedback. And it's actually been a massive shift in how I speak and communicate in the way that I do.
Were you hurt when you first heard it? I'm not trying to read your body language now.
No, I wasn't. No,
was it just insightful?
No, I had a process moment where I said, I was like, is that just his perspective, or is that accurate? And I said, you know what, if he's taken the time, like, so it didn't hurt me. It was, and the feedback wasn't like, you're a terrible preacher, be better. Like, if it was that, it might have hurt me. No one respects you in life. It wasn't like that. But I was just like, wow, that's a great piece of feedback.
Wow.
So like, I took it on board. I made some changes with it, and it, like, it's actually been a changer. So that, for me, I know we're digging down on accountability, but that's for me like proactive accountability. But what we really want with the hinge of accountability is, am I teachable?
Yeah.
Am I humble enough to implement the change? And am I humble enough to listen?
Yeah.
I think that's the hardest bit of accountability.
Wow. Oh, this. Oof. I can see. Oof. This is good.
Sometimes
but I tell you
we just don't like the source where it comes from.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's actually not about the feedback being wrong. We don't like the source.
Yeah.
And I've just learned, like, it actually, like, so I'll give you like just like an anecdote that's not related. My body does not care if I have a bad attitude when I go and work out. Like, after this, we go and grab some lunch. I may want with all of my heart to eat a almond croissant for lunch. If I make a healthy decision, I can do it with a bad attitude. My body doesn't, it's still good for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think sometimes we don't like the feedback we get because of the source it came from. We don't like the person. We don't like how they delivered it. We don't like...
they haven't got that fruit in their life. They've got no right to speak to me about that. Look at their own life.
Maybe it comes from a place of trauma. Yeah. Maybe it comes from, like, they are triggered by something. But I just know there's some of the most valuable feedback I've gotten has not come from the most ideal source, and it hasn't been communicated in an ideal way. Yeah. Now, this is where we eat the meat and spit the bones. Like, I think that's just a principle it's good to live by in life. But I just have chosen in this season, I do not disregard feedback because it comes from a source I don't like. Yeah. And that's hard. I haven't always nailed that.
Wow. You mentioned preaching. Preaching, we do a lot of that. What does preaching preparation look like for you? Like, how do you go about constructing a message, or how does revelation come for you?
Yeah, I've got I use OneNote because it's all in Microsoft, and then all of my devices talk to each other. And I'll just punch in different ideas. So I'm constantly, anytime I have an idea, I just throw it in there. I've got a folder called Preaching Ideas. And some of those are like more series ideas. It might be like, man, I reckon there's 4 or 5 preachers on this. Other times it could be, this could just be a great thought that never goes anywhere. And then from there, as I have thoughts with it, I just add to it. As I read something, I like reading a lot. Like I just feel like for us to grow, I've got to read. And I try to balance. I have a balanced diet on what I read and what I listen to. And I'll just throw different thoughts into it. I don't think I'm not like one of those guys who's like a natural, like I just wrote it all on a napkin 20 minutes before a service and hopped up and preached. Yeah. Like, that's just not my MO. If I did that,
I did that once, and that was a car crash. I think I never want to have one of them again. It
wouldn't work for me. So that's how I kind of prep. So I'll then fill that out. Then I'll like write it all out and mind map it. Sometimes on a whiteboard. Sometimes I'll just do it digitally and just move it all around. And once I've worked really hard to establish like what I believe to be a logical flow through it, which I say what I believe because sometimes I've hopped up afterwards and
it's like baking. It's like baking a cake.
Like baking a cake. Then what I do is I like, this is like, sounds like an unnecessary part, but I have all of that. I then print it out and stick it in a preaching book I've got. And then I go through, I have like this color code system. It sounds like I have a color code system. Scriptures are one color.
Yeah.
quotes are another color, main points are another one, stories are another one. And then I go through, and as I read on it, and I try to do that like 2 or 3 days out, I'll like literally be writing notes on it, and I just live on it. So it frustrates Crystal. I'll literally be driving and she'll be in the middle of talking, and I'll just have like a random idea, and I'll do the old, I don't want to say the word in case my mobile phone tries to take a note, but I'll say, "Hey Siri," and then I'll say the note, and I'll say, "Remind me in 2 hours about this thought that I just had."
So you've got a way of capturing.
Yeah.
Because you've got a very active, agile mind.
Yeah. So
you've systemized it always.
I'll do it while running, and then all those reminders will pop up at one, and then I'll insert them in. And if I haven't printed it, then I'll handwrite them all on it. And then on a Tuesday after I've preached, I'll go through and I'll all of those handwritten notes that I had in there, I'll put into the message.
Okay.
And then I'll delete out any of the content that didn't work or I didn't get to, or I thought was extra fat. And and then I'll re-put that in my OneNote in a new folder called Finished Messages. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to hack in your computer. The Finished Messages folder is the one.
Yeah, it's not very good though. So you could do it, but so that's kind of how I prep. I've had to I did find anecdotally on preaching, I did find there's 3 key words that I want everyone to feel when I've preached afterwards, and I had to. This is just my personal one, and this is how I feel like I've done. Right, I want people to feel like I have an authenticity when I preach. I don't want anyone to hop up there and go, that was not authentic. And there's a lot of different. I think that's super important because there's incredible preachers that we have high access to. I still remember, this makes it sound like an old person, but years ago, you had to buy CDs from places. So friends would send you CDs of preaching.
Yeah.
And that was how you got it. There was no YouTube, there were no podcasts. Whereas now there's preaching everywhere. I actually want to be authentic I want to be true to who I am, which is the challenge, because when we see other preachers out there and you get a 60-second soundbite, we can want to model our whole preaching craft off someone else.
Yeah.
I remember maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago, there was a preacher now who's not as prevalent anymore, who exploded onto the scene with a very edgy style, very evangelistic, and suddenly guys were dressing like him, talking like him, using language like him. Like I want to be authentic to what God's called me to do. I know that now, I think his name's Russell Johnson, incredible preacher from over in America, and he's got this amazing phrase, revival or we die, or something like that. And I'm like, what a killer phrase. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to bring that in, but I just recognize that's actually something God's spoken to him about. I don't want to be inauthentic and then try to capture that and just go, it's a great buzz phrase. So I want to be authentic to me, but I also want
to... So I don't have to occupy all streets then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was challenged by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
You set me free.
So I love the idea of being inspired.
Yeah.
And admiring that.
Yeah.
But and it does, like some of those guys I listen to because they just put like a bomb under me and believing I can change the city. But I actually want to get a God word of authenticity. And my second day, which I'll go to in a minute. But I also want to I want people to realize that I haven't hopped up and shared every story about me where I'm like great. I've had like a lot of crash and burns in ministry and in life. So I want to be authentic. I want people to feel like they can connect with that. So I'm okay. There's a difference between being too authentic, So I think there's a balance in that. But I want to be authentic. But I also want to have a sense of natural authority in that. If I'm preaching someone else's message, I will not have authority on it. That's just a spirit-filled authority. But I recognize what authority level I have. I know this is like, we're probably getting into the weeds now a little bit, so just give me the old hurry on.
We've got some great leaders, young leaders, so they'll be drinking this in, mate.
I'll give you like an example. I feel like in the last 2 or 3 years, Crystal and I have been in a space to talk on marriage, for example.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have in the first 5 or 6 years. Like, I just wouldn't have spoken on marriage. I haven't been married long enough. I hadn't been through stuff.
You were still growing up then
still
too,
growing up. Yeah, I'm 38 years old now. I recognise there are some people who have been married for 20, 25 years who have got different seasons. So I just recognise where the boundaries of my authority are.
Yeah.
I recognise where the limits of my authority on a platform is within the context of what I'm preaching. And I know this, like authority grows with time. Like it'll grow with time.
Yeah.
Like one day I will have authority to speak into things that I don't today.
Yeah.
That's okay. I don't need to rush that. Don't need to manufacture it. There are people who would do premarital when I was a campus pastor. I just recognized I was not the best person just because I was the boss or the pastor of the campus to do their premarital with them. Some people needed somebody else to come in. So I just recognize my authority. So I want to be authentic. I want to have a natural authority up there. And I want to be doctrinally accurate. Like, I know they're not in any particular order, by the way, but I want to know that what I'm preaching is actually right. Like, and I've got my own, I'll free every person who's listening to this now. We have all at some point preached something that's wrong.
Yeah.
Like, all of us have. Like, I look back on some of the messages in my file and I'm like, ooh, I said that. But all of us have.
But at least you did a good season of Bible college. Thank God for that. At least you set yourself up for a win.
Yeah.
We're all thankful.
Yeah, well, look. But I'd say, so my dad is a nurse, registered nurse, keeps his RN. He's not practicing in the sense of he doesn't work in a hospital, works in government, does a whole heap of policy writing. He is still a registered RN. As part of to keep his RN, he needs a certain amount of hours doing a certain amount of study and a certain amount of practicum. You can do a bachelor's of theology, you could do a master's, a doctorate, you could do a Cert 4, and it could be 20 years ago. If we are not continually professionally developing ourselves, well, I actually think we have an obligation as pastors to keep doing that outside of outside of the study that we do. We have a responsibility to stay up to date on that stuff.
That'll preach. And for those who know, we do lead a Bible college. I did not pay him to say that, okay? Commitment to learning for life. Yeah. Powerful thoughts about preaching. So let's talk about leadership development. You're talking about teachability before. Yeah. That seems really, really important. What sort of things do you think are essential for people who are starting out, they're discerning the call to ministry? Yeah. What sort of things do you think they need to take on board? What do they need to know? Yeah,
like if I was, again, there's this, I don't want to like wax lyrical about books, but these are just observations from me this year that I would contextualize over years and say have caused me. One of them is a book written by Todd Bolton called Tempered Resilience, How Do We Become Resilient Leaders? He has this kind of theory in it where he talks about leadership is formed in the crucible of leadership. And he talks about concepts versus context. I think this is like a game changer for people. You can learn concepts when you study. But it's when you're doing it that you learn context. Like you can read about how to do a team meeting. It's when you do it that you learn context. So I think we should have a both-and approach. We should be learning. But a lot of stuff, and this is where you see a lot of people will go through study or go through that and they learn concepts and then they take it into ministry and they're like, hang on, why isn't this working? It's because we've got to work in the context. So I think that's like vital. He has a framework for how we become a resilient leader that he outlines in that book. I won't take it from him. But I would simply say, how do you be formed as a leader? I would literally be like, just be tenacious and resilient.
Because sometimes we know, like we reflect with a broad group of people, but often you'll say, like, how'd you get in that role? And they'll say, I'm the last person standing.
I literally
like I'm the Stephen Bradbury of ministry. Yeah. Everyone else fell over just through pain and attrition or poor preparation.
Yeah, Crystal and I have a saying 18 years ago, we wrote a blank check to God and we said, use us. We, as a result of that, are just prepared to be resilient through any season, whatever that means. Yeah. So, I think if leaders can develop resilience and you can stay the course and stay sweet, I genuinely believe I'm only doing what I'm doing today, not because of my skill, but because I was resilient. I've had lots of seasons where it's been difficult.
So that's lots of overcoming, processing
stay
pain,
tenacious,
not wasting your pain,
not wasting seasons. Stay humble, stay teachable through it. Don't quit. I know it sounds like so silly. Just don't quit. Do it dirty. Do it dirty. Yeah, wow. John has this phrase, I think it's in 2 John, where he says, be careful not to lose that which you fought so hard to obtain. There's this book from the guy who he was one of the, he writes, I might get the story slightly wrong, but you can Google, check me later. He was in developing the Mustang years ago, made this massive mistake like 40 years ago, cost him $200,000 40 years ago. Wrote out his resignation, brought it into his boss, gave him the resignation. Boss said, what's this? And he effectively said, it's my resignation because I made this $200,000 mistake. And his boss said, I just invested $200,000 in you. Why would you let me waste that? and tore up his resignation. I think sometimes with leadership failures and leadership mistakes and difficult seasons, I'm almost like, you've already paid for it. Why would you waste it?
Yeah.
It just cost you something. Why would you then waste it? So I think for guys who've been through tough seasons, and that's why, like, even within the context, I could give you 4 or 5 seasons in the past 13 years of paid ministry on church staff that have been very challenging for me. I'll tell you, I've learned more in those seasons than I have when it's been going really well. I think it's C.S. Lewis who says, experience is a brutal teacher, but by God do you learn. I just think that's true. If there's one thing I can encourage people in, we are in. Mark Sayers, again, in his book, A Non-Anxious Presence, talks about the grey zone within an anxious world.
Yeah,
it's a really powerful book. Like, for me, we are in a grey zone as a church. The church globally across the world, it's going through change in a new era like it's never had to before. If we're finding ministry tough, it's because we've never led in this context. I'm just like, guys, stay the course, like, be resilient, like manage your own anxiety levels. And I would literally say you would be surprised with what God can do with people who just stick it out.
Yeah. This is where we need the sons of Issachar who have understanding of the times to help us interpret. So Mark Sayers is a real gift to the body of Christ, isn't he?
Yeah.
It's a great book.
If I was to give like a recommended reading list from this year, literally a lot of the stuff is framed off a family systems theory by a guy called Bowen. Edwin Friedman wrote a book called The Failure of Nerve, unbelievable book. And it talks about managing anxiety within organizations based on a family systems, and just talks about the chronic anxiety that we find within organizations and within leadership.
Because usually it's so goes the leader, so goes the church.
Yeah. And again, like a really easy book written by an Australian guy. It's called Managing Leadership Anxiety by Stephen Cuss. He has also a podcast series named the same thing. He will talk about anxiety is when we think we need something that we don't need. So I wonder how much of our leadership anxiety. So I'll give you like a really quick anecdote that I think like builds anxiety within organizations that we've got to manage. Mark Sayers references a lot of this in Non-Anxious Presence too. I finish preaching. I then walk from the pulpit to the front row. The first question I often will ask the person, what would be the first question? You'd turn to Jean and you would say, How'd I go? What are you feeling in that? You've got the anxiety saying something I need that I don't need. In that moment, did I look good? Did I impress people? Did I come across clever and funny? Do people like me? All of that anxiety. What's the actual right question that we should be asking then? Did God minister to people? Did people experience life change because of me, the vessel? Like, was God represented well? That's what we need. We don't need the approval of people. But every time I walk that, I feel that anxiety. How did I look? What do people think of me?
Yeah.
It's something and if you continue to bow to that anxiety, what it breeds is a chronic anxiety within you that you constantly need.
And then project that on other people.
Project it onto other people.
I'm glad in my preaching training, I was trained under a good practitioner. He said, you get your mark out of 10 if you're achievement orientated before you get off the stage.
Yeah.
He says, because then otherwise you're just going to be held a prisoner to the feedback of human beings. So you need that at a certain level. But was God happy with how I delivered and how the anointing worked through me at that stage?
Yeah.
So I've got to keep reminding myself of that.
Yeah, and I would say this, like, God is proud of me.
Yeah.
Like, full stop. Like, he's not more approving of me because I preached well. Now, there's work I do in making sure that I bring a gift that's acceptable in a sacrifice of worship, 100%. But I think if I'm responding constantly to those anxieties, they will bleed into other areas. And there's lots of stuff around family system series that's fascinating within church contexts that are really helpful. But I'd say that personal thing within me, like as a leader, I think that's become vital.
Wow, I love how you read and synthesize, and you're open for new ideas. I think that's just it's a real hallmark of your leadership. So talk to us about like Hillsong. Hillsong Church has set the pace for many parts of the Australian and now global church for many decades now. It's in a hopeful and a renewal phase. What sort of things are the team working on?
Yeah. So we've got 40 years of rich history. I think Pastors Brian and Bobby were the innovators and pioneers of how we do church, and we owe them a lot. I think there's a lot of incredible lessons that we can learn from them. I would say across humanity, everything's changed in the past 3 years. Everything's changed. Yeah. My literal role, looking after campuses over 3 states, I would not be able to do in an era in without a horrendous amount of travel. Whereas now we can Zoom into meetings. Everything's changed.
Yeah.
I would say for us, we've got like a real focus on health at the moment. We're working a lot based on missions. We've got 3 missional contexts that all align with a broader vision about a healthy church, changing lives through Christ. And then Phil's worked really hard on 3 missional outworkings of what that looks like. We're doing our best as an organisation to embody servant leadership, which is, which I want to say this, it's not unique just to church. Like this inverted hierarchy, it's been, and values-based versus vision-based leadership, this stuff's been around for a decade in any organisation that we've seen turn around. They've all been doing this stuff. It's just that we're kind of catching on to it as a church now. Turns out biblical principles actually work. What a shock. So we're doing our best to embody that space. And we're just doing our best to be humble and figure out like what is the next decade. I'd say this, we've just been through a transition. There hasn't been a lot of other churches that have been through a foundational, pioneering apostolic leader transition. And I think we're doing our best just to navigate that well. And in the years to come, there'll be other churches who go through that. And hopefully as the broader body, we'll all learn off each other.
The Hillsong, always innovating, always leading the way.
Yeah.
We're so thankful for the ministry of your part of the kingdom. So as we sort of move to some sort of wrap up, we have talked about resiliency a fair bit, and I like that. I love your really honest and realistic presentation of the joy of ministry, but also the challenge. Some talk about IQ, EQ. I heard one write about AQ, our adversity quotient, spiritual quotient. So what's that like for you and Crystal? Things haven't always been perfect, haven't been rosy for you and your 2 beautiful teenage children. What do you do in tough seasons? Like, how do you keep going, and how do you keep being Stephen Bradbury?
Yeah, I think anyone who's been married for more than 2 minutes nobody's marriage has been rosy for years and years. I think any couple, I met a couple at the Gold Coast who were just about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. I guarantee they've probably had even more seasons where things have not always been easy. I think this is where, we genuinely have a great marriage now. We've worked hard at it. I think there's a bunch of learnings we've had in there. We've obviously got teenage kids now. That's a different season of parenting. Like it was one thing parenting kids when they were younger. Now they're older. Like in a couple of years, Ezekiel will be finished school. That's like just a different season again.
But they both love the house of God, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think like we made a decision when they were in youth, for example, like my kids don't pick their own diet on what they eat. If they did, they just eat chicken nuggets the whole time when they were young. So if I recognise they shouldn't pick their normal diet, why would I let them pick their spiritual diet? So we just always had as for me in my house, this is what we do. And they love church. We did as a family the overland track in Tasmania. It's 80 odd Ks through Tasmania, and we landed back. We finished on the Friday, landed back in Queensland on the Sunday at lunchtime. Drove home, started to unpack all our gear. 7 days out in the wild. It got to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and both my kids were like, "Are we going to church tonight?" And it was like we were on holidays, so we were like, "We're not going to church," and they're like, literally like, "Why would we not go to church?" So I was like, "You guys can Uber there." No, I drove them to church. I think I sat up the back of the room, which was was just so great. But yeah, they love church. I just think Crystal and I have just been humble and listened to each other through tough seasons. We've talked with people. We're not too prideful. I think one of the most nerve-wracking things for anyone who's been married for a short amount of time is my marriage isn't going well. I think that for all of us, literally there are seasons, there are weeks where you're like, "Oh man, our marriage isn't going well." And then there's months where sometimes you're like, "We need to get some help. Our marriage isn't going well." And we just keep it a priority. We both focus on growing ourselves in that. In this new season, we've had to learn, like, because I've travelled a lot the last 6 months. So I've been away a lot, and Crystal's been looking after the campus and the family. We've had to fight to prioritise each other in that time. Again, I think if anxiety is responding to something I think I need that I don't, if I think I need achievement, approval, my work to be going well, etc., 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 then that will come at the expense of something. So we've had to fight to keep family, home, and marriage the main thing. It does help that we both feel so strongly called.
Yeah.
So our ministries intertwine, and that's a beautiful thing because it feels like it brings us closer together when we're doing what we feel God's called us in our home to do. But we just go through seasons where you have to fight and grow and change. We're finding that as parents now. We do not have young children anymore. They've got their own ideas. They've got their own views on life and not even ministry, just on life. They're growing up in a different generation. Our relationship with them is changing and transitioning, and we've just got to be open to that. But yeah.
Talked about resiliency, your local church, leadership, Hillsong. Final thought. Something we've missed. Big idea. What are you working on now? Final thought.
Yeah, mate, I'm just growing into the role I'm in.
Yeah.
That'd be it. I went from leading a campus that was successful and did really well and was healthy and it's got beautiful people in it, transitioned that on to my wife. So I volunteer, still heavily involved there. I've never led in the way we're leading now. I've never led in an era in a church like I am now. It's just been a year of growth.
It's wonderful watching your life flourish, mate. I remember the first time you and Crystal walked through the doors of church. It's been almost 20 years ago, and watching your life and watching you morph, go through challenging seasons. The proverb says, the way of the wise winds upward.
Yeah.
So 2 more years and you're going to be 40.
Yeah.
You'll pick up some grey hairs soon. But I just really admire your commitment for learning for life, leaning in.
Yeah,
Got an active brain, and you've always prioritised your marriage. I really rate that. Yeah. Andrew Midson, thank you for your time on the Flourishing Life today. God bless you.
Thanks for having us.